Well, I'm John Travis here in Mullumbimby, New South Wales I forgot to check the date. It is the 11th of March here and 10th of March there in somewhere in Marin. Where are you exactly? Sausalito?
Sausalito,
Yeah,
almost in March.
yeah. And I'm not sure if we've ever actually met face to face or not. Do
We
you
did a long
recall
time ago, but it's been many years.
do you know where and when?
It was at some meeting somewhere, but I don't remember where. It's maybe like
One of
30 years
those.
ago,
Okay.
30 or 40 years ago. Might have
I
been
I
American, it
first
might have been the American Medical Students Association when you would first come up with the term of wellness,
down in San Diego.
somewhere like that, or
Yeah,
Chicago.
Tom Ferguson took me to one of their meetings back in 76, 77. Interesting. Well, I first started hearing about you when I talked to Sandra McClanahan in the 80s and learned about your research then. And then, of course, discovering that my granddaughter and your daughter were in the same kindergarten class. And you
Small
know
world.
Hannah, who said to say hi.
Hi.
So we have a number of connections, but this is our first serious conversation in what, 40 some years.
Hopefully not too serious.
Well, yes. Well, my goal today is to find out who you are and why for the future generations that may be interested in us old farts when we're long gone. And I'm collecting these recordings, not so much about what, because that's well documented, but what led you to do what you do? And beginning with, like, where were you born and what's your birth order and siblings and early memories of health and things like that.
I was born in a log cabin in Kentucky. No, sorry, different life. Sorry. I was born in Dallas, Texas in 1953. And my father's a dentist, was a dentist. My mom was a genius in many respects. She graduated high school when she was 14 and got her master's in journalism Northwestern when she was 18, and tried to adapt that into a kind of a Dallas, Texas lifestyle back in the 50s was really always a challenge. So she
Yeah.
was always looking for creative ways to express herself through writing children's musicals or records, or being a historian, or making films, or helping my dad set up his practice, just whatever. And
Wow.
later in life, I did magicians. I was an entrepreneur. I did magic shows for birthdays and parties for $5 a show, and then later $10 a show when I got better. And did that for a long time. That was fun. That was before internet, and we had to find other ways to amuse ourselves. And then I got really seriously into photography. And then when I was 12, I became an apprentice I had a little darkroom in my house and everything. And when I was 12, the best portrait photographer in Dallas, who had trained in New York, a guy named Tom DeQuino, took me on as an apprentice. He said, I'll pay you $1.60 an hour, which was minimum wage then, but I'll
Yeah.
only pay you for 4 hours a day because you're going to be learning the rest of the time. And I was, and it was great. And I learned a lot, and I did that for a couple of years. And then when I was 14, he said, look, I've got more business than I need. Why don't you go off and start your own studio? And you can, I'll let you buy my equipment used at a good price, which I did. And so I had my own portrait studio when I was 14, which was great, and did that
Wow.
for a time. And then I became a stringer, like a occasional photographer for some magazines that got me into all the rock concerts for free, like Rolling Stone and Newsweek back then, when it was a magazine, and other things like that. And then I got interested in photography in a very different sense from when I was doing portraits. And portraits were always, this is before Photoshop, it was like airbrushing and retouching and lighting, and how you frame the person
Mhm.
and pose them, and the kind of equipment you use and all that. And so I got good at learning to make people look better than they were, which is what everyone wants when you get your portrait made. But then I got interested in a totally different kind of photography, where I would just take a little Leica, little 35mm black and white pictures of just wherever I was, and my heroes became people like Walker Evans and a guy named Gary Winogrand, who I ended up studying with. And I transferred to the University of Texas in Austin in 1973 to when I was for my third and fourth years there. to actually, yeah, and to study with him. His name was Gary Winogrand. He was, to me, one of the great photographers of the 20th century. And he was an even better teacher. And in fact, he put a photograph on the wall and he'd say, "What do you see?" And people would say, "Oh, I see this or that." And he'd say, like, "How do you know someone doesn't have a gun right outside the frame?" Or "How do you know this?" You know, always getting us to challenge our preconceptions, and kept making the point that, you know, great photography, great art, great science, great music, great lovemaking, great anything is when you can approach it with beginner's mind without preconceptions. You're trying to be innovative and not imitative, and to kind of see it, you know, and to the degree you can see something from different perspectives at the same time, then, you know, you get it's like more pixels in a picture and so on. Anyway, so I would, you know, that was when we would use dark rooms, and it'd be day and night and day again. I'd be in the dark room with him, or he just would just photograph manically, because he had lung cancer and he knew he was dying. So when he died, he had like 40,000 rolls of Tri-X film, you know, 36 exposures each. And John Sharkowski, who was the curator of the Museum of Modern Art in New York, processed and printed all the pictures and did a retrospective show of his life of photographs that Gary had never even seen before, because they were all from his unprocessed film. It was really amazing. So, and I was going to be a photographer, and there was a guy who did over 100 Life magazine covers named Philippe Halsman, and he came to Dallas and gave a talk there at one of the universities, and I went to see him, and he was so glamorous. He showed all these nude pictures of Marilyn Monroe that he'd taken, or, you know, all these amazing places he'd been and people he'd photographed. And afterwards, I went up to him. I said, "You know, I want to be a photographer like you." He said, "Oh no, don't be a photographer. It's a terrible life." he said, "Be a doctor. Then you can take all the pictures you want, and you don't have to worry about pleasing an editor and being in planes all the time and all that kind of stuff." Anyway, so I did, and
that was it.
that was it.
But
to answer your question about how I got interested in doing the work I'm doing, is that more to the point? I mean, would you?
Well, let's go back. Did you have any siblings, and what was your early, your mom obviously was a big influence, and your dad.
Well, my dad was an influence because dentists have been interested in preventive medicine long before doctors, and so more than doctors. I have an older sister, a younger brother, and a younger sister.
So you were second, oldest son. So then specifically, once you decided from the photographer's advice to become a doctor, what happened?
Well, not just because of that. I'd been thinking, my dad really wanted me to be a dentist and take over his practice. And I went so far as to take the dental aptitude test, and I just decided that wasn't my thing. So he was very disappointed, but, you know, I think he's glad that ultimately it worked out well, but for a while there, he wasn't so sure.
Yeah. Is he still alive?
No, he passed a few years ago.
So that led to, well, you said you went to University of Texas and Austin?
I spent my third and fourth years there. I spent my first couple of years at Rice University in Houston.
Oh, yeah.
And it almost killed me. That's how I got interested in doing the work I'm doing. And I've talked about this before, but basically the short version is that I really wanted to be a doctor, and I knew I had to do well in organic chemistry in order to get into medical school, as you probably remember from those days when that was like the most important course, because it has absolutely nothing to do with what kind of doctor you'll be, but it tests your ability to memorize useless amounts of information, and which is a good quality to have in medical school. But I got this feeling like somehow like the teacher, I was convinced, had escaped Nazi Germany and stopped in Houston on his way to Argentina to be my organic chemistry professor. Hans Richter was his name. I still remember. And on the first day of class, he said, "This is a weed out course, and I'm going to weed you out. And look to the left and look to the right, and one of you won't be here after the first semester." And, you know, these are all people at Rice who all graduated, you know, in the top of their class and all used to making straight A's. And suddenly he said, "I'm going to grade everybody on a curve. And so, you know, a third of you will get C's, and 6 will get A's, and a 6 will fail, and it doesn't matter if everybody gets, you know, 97 through 99, the 97s will fail, you know, because it's going to be on a bell curve." So just to add more stress to it. And then he taught it in a way without a textbook. So it was all just rote memory, which has never been my strong suit. So I began to worry that I wasn't going to do well. And the more I worried, the harder it became to study, and the harder it became to study, the more I worried. And I got into this vicious cycle where I literally stayed up for a week straight because I was so agitated and worried that I couldn't sleep. And that kind of sleep deprivation is enough to make you psychotic, which it did for me. And and I began to think like, well, dead people look like they're really peaceful, and why don't I just kill myself? Like, what a great idea, like, why didn't I think of that earlier? Like, because you're stupid, 'cause I really felt like I was stupid, and somehow I managed to fool the admissions committee that I was not stupid, and that now that I was with a bunch of really smart kids and they were going to grade under a curve, it was just a matter of time before they figured out what a big mistake they made in letting me in. And so I went to the campus. Anyway, it's a long story, but the shorter version is that I was all set to do that. There was I was staying in this concrete jungle called Smith Square. I don't even know if it's there anymore. And it had that was when the Houston Astros were the football team. That's before they left Houston and went elsewhere. The Houston Oilers, I'm sorry. And they had this big oil derrick. Their practice field was right in front of this apartment jungle that I lived in. And I was going to just jump off the top and be done with it. And then I thought, well, then my parents will get upset. So maybe I'll just get really drunk and run my car into the side of a bridge. And then everybody will think, oh, he just got drunk. What a stupid thing to do. They won't know what really happened. And I was all set to do that. And I got so run down from this horrible case of infectious mononucleosis that I literally didn't have the strength to get out of bed. And around that time, my parents got a sense of how messed up I was and they took me home to Dallas to, quote, recuperate. And my plan was to get strong enough to kill myself, as crazy as that sounds. Meanwhile, this was back in 1972, end of 72, early 73. My older sister, who I mentioned earlier, had been a child of the 60s and had got involved with this ecumenical spiritual teacher named Swami Satchidananda, and it really helped her. So my parents decided to have a cocktail party for the Swami. This was in Dallas back in 1973. And, there's an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and that certainly was true for me. So in walks this kind of central castings idea of what a Swami should look like, long white beard and saffron robes and sandals. And he sat down in our living room and gave a little satsang, a lecture, and he started off by saying that nothing can bring you lasting happiness. And the other reason I was so depressed was not only because I felt like I was stupid, but I felt like nothing could bring lasting happiness. I had this kind of glimpse into the reality of that. And the combination of feeling like I was never going to amount to anything because I was stupid. I certainly wasn't smart enough to be a doctor. And even if I were, it doesn't bring lasting happiness anyway. So why not just do yourself in? Because again, dead people look like they're peaceful. So he went off, and when I would talk to people, I'd say, oh, of course things will make you happy. Just, get rich and famous and have a, beautiful wife and beautiful kids, and, and then you'll be happy. And I knew that wasn't true. So anyway, so he's sitting in our living room, the Swami, and he says, nothing can bring lasting happiness. And I thought, finally, I feel validated. Somebody's, gets it. But then in the next moment, I remember thinking, well, I'm about to do myself in. I'm so miserable, and he's radiant. What am I missing here? And he went on to say what probably sounds like a new age cliche, but really completely turned my life around, was that while nothing can bring lasting happiness, that it's our nature to be happy and peaceful and healthy for the most part. And not being mindful of that, we end up running after all these things that we think are going to make us happy and healthy. And in the process of running after them, we end up disturbing what we could have already if we just stop doing that. And perhaps the ultimate irony, it's like, if only I had more money, more power, more sex, more beauty, more accomplishment, whatever, then I'd be happy, then people would love me, then I wouldn't feel so lonely, and then everything would be great. Now, what he taught me later is that once you set up that view of the world, however it turns out, you generally lose, because until you get it, you feel stressed, and the stakes go up, so the stresses go up. It's not just winning or losing, it's being a winner or loser, and winners people love, and losers people ignore. So if you don't want to feel lonely and isolated, be a winner, and so until you get it, you feel stressed, and if someone else gets it, then you feel really stressed, and it kind of reinforces this dog eat dog, zero-sum game view of the world.
Yeah.
The more the less there is for me, and you better get it while you can and get out of my way. If you don't, and if you don't get it, it feels bad. But even if you do get it, it's very seductive, because in the moment it's like, now I'm happy. It's great, I got it. But it doesn't last. It's usually soon followed either now what? It's never enough. One guy said, I used to think if I made X amount of dollars a year, and then I did, and that wasn't enough, and then it was more and more and more. Or one patient told me years ago that I can't even enjoy the view for the mountain I've climbed. I'm already looking over at the next one. Or it's not now what, it's either so what, big deal. It doesn't really provide that lasting sense of meaning that I was craving at the time. And another patient later told me that the letdown that comes from accomplishing a goal is so great. He makes sure he has a dozen projects going at the same time, so he can immediately shift his attention, elsewhere, and just so the cycle continues. But the Swami's approach was to always treat the cause. And the cause ultimately, if you take it back far enough, is that we have to think we have to get our health and our well-being and our happiness and our love from outside of ourselves. And in the ultimate irony, in the process of running after all these things that we think are going to bring us that, we didn't end up disturbing what we could have already if we just stopped doing it. And in this Swami liked to make puns, so people would say, "What are you, a Hindu?" He'd say, "No, I'm an Undu," which is why the title of our newest book, Undo It, is really an homage to him. And the idea is that these spiritual practices, meditation and yoga and selfless service and chanting or whatever it happens to be, secular or religious, that they don't bring you a sense of peace and health and well-being, but rather, at least temporarily, they keep us from, they allow us and empower us to stop disturbing what we already have, or what we could already have if we just stop doing and disturbing those things that are keeping us from experiencing what's already there. I think, I don't know if you coined the term, I know you termed the term wellness, but if you coined the term dis-ease, that we're born with a sense of ease and then we disturb it and get dis-eased. But they're all just variations on the same theme. And so then when I was back then ready to do myself in, I thought, well, that feels right. Let me try this weird stuff. And I'll move killing myself down to plan B. I can always come back to that if this doesn't work. And then I began to get glimpses of what it felt like to feel peaceful and to realize, again, to remind myself literally that these techniques didn't bring that to me, but it at least gave me the tools to help stop disturbing that, at least temporarily. And then I can make the connection between when I suffered and why, and to stop blaming other people and realize, because if it's them, if only I had something you've got, then you've got power over me. If it's like, if the question transforms and shifts to, what am I doing that's disturbing my own inner peace and health and love and well-being? Well, I can do something about that. Well, I'll come back to that. But so to me, it was a very empowering realization. So I went back to school and actually transferred it from Rice to the University of Texas in Austin, and did really well. It was a humanities major. There's an old saying, "Don't let school interfere with your education." So got involved with a lot of meditation and psychedelics and all the kinds of things that one would love to do in Austin back in 1973 to 75. And graduated first in my class and gave the baccalaureate. And I say that not to brag, but to say, I went from feeling like I was totally worthless and totally stupid and couldn't read a headline in the newspaper and tell you a minute later what it said, to doing really well. And it was all because of that shift in me. And for me, that sense of depression and being suicidal was my doorway into what ended up being my life's work, because I feel like I've been on borrowed time ever since then, because I came so close to doing myself in. I mean, I really, without sounding melodramatic, I could not have gotten any closer and still be alive. But here I am. So for me, it's been this kind of living on borrowed time and what I call this conspiracy of love, in the sense that when you feel like you've kind of gone to that level of darkness and abyss and just, the unimaginably awful stuff, when you have that kind of self-loathing that you would do yourself in, it makes other risks seem pretty trivial. Like, okay, I'm going to take a year off from when I was in, I went to medical school at Baylor College of Medicine, Houston, did my core surgery training with Michael DeBakey, the famed heart surgeon, one of the people who pioneered bypass surgery and learning how to do that. And I've told this story so many times, but the short version is we'd cut people open, we bypass their clogged arteries, he'd tell them they were cured, and they go home, and more often than not, do all the things that cause the problem. Their bypasses are clogged up. Do it. For me, that became the metaphor that we were literally bypassing the problem, and instead of, as the Swami said, treat the cause, and there's always a causal chain of events that leads to something. And so I went to these things called libraries and pulled out these things called journals that they had back then, and began to read that in dogs and cats and pigs and rabbits and monkeys, you could cause them to get heart disease if you made them smoke cigarettes and put them under stress and fed them junk food and didn't let them exercise, and you could reverse it if you changed all those things. So why should people be any different? I said, well, that's a crazy idea. But so much to my parents' dismay, and my teachers said, well, it's a crazy idea, but go for it. You'll learn something. It's one of the nice things about Texas is it has this kind of pioneering ethos. It's like, yeah, you'll learn something, go for it. If it's not going to work, it doesn't matter, go try it, you'll learn it. In Boston, that would never have happened. Excuse me. So I took a year off from between my second and third years of medical school, and the chief of cardiology donated the tests and referred 10 really sick patients to us and put them in a hotel for a month. And after going to every hotel in Houston that said no, the last one said yes. It's called the Plaza Hotel in Montrose, which isn't even there anymore. And they gave us 10 rooms from us. It was me and the cook, and we, I taught the yoga classes, did the exercise with them, ran the support groups, did everything.
You did that all in med school?
Yeah, I did that between my second and third years of medical school.
Wow.
Didn't know that. And we used thallium as the major endpoint measure to measure myocardial perfusion or blood flow to the heart. And it got better in 8 of the 10 patients, and most of them became pain-free. And nobody believed it. It was my first experience that when you're doing something that's really disruptive, and again, beginner's mind, because I kept thinking like, okay, I'm not going to kill myself. Like, what's the worst that could happen? You'll try things you wouldn't do if you go through an experience like that. And also it taught me, especially in running the support groups, which I'd originally set up as just helping people stay on the diet and exercise. And I realized that it was probably the most important intervention in its own right, because it recreated a sense of safety where people could literally open their hearts and let their emotional defenses down. Sorry, let me turn this off. Forgot that I had this on. They could literally open their hearts to each other. They could talk about what was, be emotionally vulnerable. And I learned that you can only be intimate to the degree you can open your heart and be vulnerable. And you can only do that to the degree you feel safe. And so by creating these safe places where what goes in the group stays in the group, and people focus on identifying what they're feeling and expressing it as a feeling rather than as a thought or judgment, it creates this amazing intimacy. And one of the things I learned is that suffering can be a powerful doorway for transformation. It was for me. That's, if I had gotten depressed, we wouldn't be having this conversation. For someone else, they might be having a heart attack. And almost invariably, someone who's had a heart attack is usually depressed anyway, because you feel like you have half a heart, half a man kind of thing, or half a woman. And just as many women, have actually more now, are getting heart disease than men. We're worried about coronavirus, which we should be. The real pandemic is heart disease and diabetes and chronic diseases and things like that. That's what most people are dying from. And it's epidemic to the extent that we copy each other's behaviors. Anyway, so for me, helping someone, there's a sacred moment when someone is suffering, where they've been diagnosed with an illness, particularly a life-threatening illness, like take heart disease, for example, but it could be so many, anything. For me, it was depression. For someone else, it might be breast cancer. And if we can not just kill or numb or bypass the pain, literally or figuratively, but to help them use that as a doorway for asking questions like, how did I get in this situation? And what can I do to get out of it? How can I reverse it? How can I get off of these medications that I've been told I have to take for the rest of my life? How can I avoid, in many cases, surgery that I otherwise would have had? There's a field called lifestyle medicine that known as the father of lifestyle medicine, which is using lifestyle changes not only to help prevent disease, but to treat and even reverse it, either in combination with drugs and surgery or often as an alternative to these. So in our studies, we were able to show over a period of 42 years that these same lifestyle changes, eat well, move more, stress less, love more, whole foods, plant-based diet that's low in fat and sugar, moderate exercise, like walking a half an hour a day, various meditation and yoga type techniques. They're called stress management, but as we talked about, the ancient swamis and rabbis and priests and monks and nuns didn't develop these techniques just to manage stress. They're really tools for transformation. And love more, meaning spend more time with your loved ones, your friends and family. And what we found over a series of 4 decades, that these same lifestyle changes could reverse a wide variety of chronic diseases. We showed for the first time with heart disease, and then we repeated those studies with using randomized control groups and so on, and published them, all these studies in all the first-rate peer-reviewed journals, the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA and Circulation, et cetera. And we've been able to show that these same lifestyle changes can reverse heart disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, obesity. We did the first randomized trial showing that these same lifestyle changes can slow, stop, or reverse the progression of men who have early stage prostate cancer and will be likely to refer women with early stage breast cancer. We did a study with Craig Venter showing that we could change gene expression in 503 genes and 501 genes in just 3 months. And in a sense, upregulating or turning on the good genes and downregulating or turning off the bad ones. We did a study with Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize for her pioneering work with telomeres, the ends of our chromosomes that regulate how long we live. And we found for the first time, she had shown that, and Alyssa Apple had shown that chronic stress will shorten your telomeres, and smoking will shorten your telomeres, and eating junk food will shorten your telomeres, and so on. And as your telomeres get shorter, your life gets shorter, and the risk of premature death from pretty much everything goes up correspondingly. We found for the first time that when people make good lifestyle changes, the same ones we've been talking about, their telomerase increased by 30% in just 3 months, which we published in the Lancet. And over a 5-year period, they actually got 10% longer instead of what happened in the control group, which is they got shorter. And that was when we published that in the Lancet. The editors called it reversing aging at a cellular level. So the more diseases we study and the more underlying biological mechanisms we look at, the more scientific evidence we have to show how powerful these simple lifestyle changes are and how quickly people can get better because the underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic. So it kind of led me to this unifying theory that my wife, Ann, and I, who we've worked together now for over 20 years and been married for over 16, is that this unifying theory in this new book that we wrote last year called Undo It. And it begins with a quote from Albert Einstein that's one of my favorite quotes, which says, if you can't make it simple, you don't understand it well enough. To try to take all this decades of work and reduce it into its purest form. Eat well, move more, stress less, love more. Boom, that's it. And the unifying theory is, why is it that these same lifestyle changes can reverse or prevent so many of the most common chronic diseases? And the kind of the blinding flash of the obvious was, which is the unifying theory, is that they're not the same, they're not different diseases. I was trained like you were, to, different diseases, different diagnoses, different things. But I really have come to see that so many of these chronic diseases are really just the same disease manifesting and masquerading in different forms. And I say that because they all share the same underlying biological mechanisms, things like chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome and telomeres and gene expression, angiogenesis and apoptosis, et cetera. And each one of these mechanisms, as you know, is directly influenced by what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have. And the more diseases we study, the more evidence we have to show that. And so that radically simple, first of all, it explains why we often see the same person will have multiple comorbidities. They'll have heart disease and hypertension and high cholesterol and type 2 diabetes and be overweight and so on. Or why whole cultures, like in China, before they started to eat like us and live like us and die like us, the whole cultures would have very low rates of these chronic diseases until they start to copy our lifestyle. It also makes it radically simple what we advise people to do. It's not like you have to one kind of diet and lifestyle recommendations for reversing or preventing heart disease, a different one for diabetes or prostate cancer, et cetera. It's the same for all of them. It radically simplifies it. And we're now in the middle of doing the first randomized trial to see if these same lifestyle changes may reverse the progression of early stage Alzheimer's disease. I mentioned my mom earlier, and it was all of her siblings got Alzheimer's and died from it, including her. And I have one of the genes for it, the ApoA4 gene. And so watching her beautiful mind decay was just tragic. And but I think we're at a place with Alzheimer's very similar to where we were with heart disease 42 years ago when I did my first research then, which is that back then, less intensive lifestyle changes could slow the rate of which your arteries get clogged. We found a more intensive one could actually get less clogged. It could reverse it. And likewise, the finger study, the mind study have shown that less intensive, the same kinds of lifestyle interventions, but less intensive, can slow the rate of getting worse with Alzheimer's. I think that a more intensive intervention may actually reverse it, at least if you catch it early enough.
Yeah.
And because the same biological mechanisms affect Alzheimer's that affect all these other conditions.
Or type 3 diabetes, some are calling it.
That's because, again, they're all the same disease. Just one more example of that.
I want to go back to your story again, though, because we actually have a lot of similarities. I considered jumping off the roof when I was an intern in San Francisco in 1970, was depressed most of my early life. Actually didn't solve it till I was 65. I was functional, but depression, and came up with a conclusion that the currency of wellness is connection. And by the way, I didn't coin the word wellness. It actually dates from the 1600s. And it was Albert Dunn, who was my mentor, who coined the term high level wellness. And it was his book that I found on the clearance table at the Hopkins Medical Bookstore in 71. It was 10 years old, out of print, that turned me on. But
well, it's nice to get credit for something, even if you didn't deserve it.
Well, we had to spell wellness on the phone when we had the center. And Dan Rather opened his 1979 piece on us saying wellness. Now there's a word you don't hear every day. And it was true. But the actual word had been around for quite a while. The other thing is that your interest in support groups. One of my favorite things at our wellness center was the lifestyle evolution groups, which was the same thing. And I love how Brene Brown has made vulnerability and shame, brought them out of the closet. They're the keys to intimacy. And my whole life has been about creating supportive environments for myself, primarily, having grown up in a small town where we had that before television, then lost it. And that getting people connected is fundamental. And I was delighted to see you coming to those same conclusions and doing it with the kind of scientific rigor that I lacked. So,
well, I mean,
but back,
who would have thought Medicare would be paying for, support groups and meditation?
Yeah.
I wrote a
But
book
back
about
when you met the Swami, did you ever wind up in Yogaville then? Or how did you and Sandra get connected?
We met through the Swami. I'd been in Yogaville many times. We went to India together many times. Sandra, started the country's first integrative or holistic, medical center, integrative medicine center, if you will.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she did it in Putnam, Connecticut. She called it Integral Health. And this was in I was a medical student at the time, so it must have been like 1976 or so, a long time ago.
Really? Huh.
And she'd started even a few years before that. But, I wrote a book back in 1998 called Love and Survival that reviewed more than hundreds and now literally tens of thousands of studies showing that, as you've indicated, that people who are lonely and depressed and isolated are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely from pretty much everything when you compare to those who have a sense of love and connection and community. And so to me, all of this is really a conspiracy of love, that we bring people together, who are suffering and empower them with tools that they can use to transform their lives. I've been advising 4 of what were presidential candidates, only one of them is still, to say, look, it's not enough to say who pays for healthcare, but what are we paying for? If we're just paying for more drugs and surgery, that's not sustainable. But we've done studies showing that with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Pennsylvania, Highmark, that they could cut their costs in half in the first year when people turn off the faucet around the sink that's overflowing, when they change their lifestyles. And so if we're really going to make better care available to more people at lower costs, we're going to have to teach people how to empower themselves and to realize that our bodies really often have this remarkable and amazing ability to heal if we just simply stop doing what's causing the problem, which more often than not are the diet and lifestyle choices that we make every day.
So back to med school, or you taken the year off, and then you went back, I presume. And by the way, Baylor was my first choice for medical schools, but they lost my application. They sent it to my summer. I was home for vacation. They sent it to the college address. By the time I got back, it was part 2 of the application. You had to go through 2 stages. So I wound up in Boston, as you well know, a very different climate.
Yeah.
So you went back to Baylor.
Yeah, well, when I got to, anyway, I'll talk about that later. When I got to the Harvard system, how hierarchical it is. I got to be a medical student at Houston, at Baylor, that I couldn't do as a senior resident at Mass General. But anyway, so I went back to school, finished my MD. Then I decided to take another year off to address some of the, when you're doing disruptive research, it gets held to a higher standard. And in some ways it should be, because it's just not incremental. So when we saw that 8 of the 10 people showed improvement in their thallium scans from the 10 patients in the pilot study that I did, they said, oh, the test must be broken, or the test must be wrong. And I said, this is the same test. You did the test. You read the test. These are the same tests we send people to bypass surgery every day with. How come it's not working any longer? Or, well, you didn't control for the time of day you tested your patients. Well, that's true, but whoever does that? Do you ever do that? No, but still, that's theoretically the circadian rhythms could have affected. Or, you didn't have a randomized control group, which was a valid concern. I said, yeah, that's absolutely true. It's possible that this could have happened anyway, but how often do you see patients getting better like this? People who literally couldn't walk across the street without getting chest pain, or make love with their spouse without getting pain, or play with their kids, or go back to work without pain. And within a few weeks, they're pain-free. How often do you see that? Well, that doesn't matter. You didn't have a randomized control group. So finished medical school 2 years later, then took another year off and did a randomized trial. This time we did have a randomized control group, and we showed that it got better. And I heard that the chief of medicine at Harvard at the time, Alexandra Leaf, who was a little like, did you ever see that movie, The Paper Chase with John Houseman on Harvard Law
Yeah,
School?
yeah.
That kind of crusty Boston Brahmin character he played,
Hmm.
that John Houseman played in that. Yeah, it was kind of like Alexander Leaf was a lot like that. But I heard that through the chief of medicine at Baylor, Tony Gatto at the time, had trained in Mass General and knew Alex and knew that Alex was interested in this sort of stuff. In fact, Alex really had done the original Blue Zones work. He'd gone and tracked in
Hmm.
Nepal. And anyway, so I called up Alex Leaf after I'd finished the second study, after, in between my finishing medical school and starting internship. I said, hey, would you like to come down and see what we're doing? And I'll pay your travel expenses. As I have my portrait studio, so I had money I could pay them. And he came down on his own nickel, and he later shared with, so he heard all the patients in the group go around the circle talking about how, like, I couldn't do this and now I'm pain free, and I couldn't do that and now I'm pain free, and my arteries are less clogged, and all this kind of stuff. And so he invited me to give medical grand rounds at Mass General while he was down visiting in Houston. And I said, sure, and then when Tony Gatto, the chief of medicine at Baylor, found out about it, who had trained at Mass General and knew how hierarchical the Harvard system is, he said no medical student, as far as he knew, had ever given grand rounds, medical grand rounds. And I said, well, okay, I'll be the first. Again, having survived wanting to kill myself, it's like nothing really fazed me at that point.
What do you got to lose?
Like, what do you got to lose? What's the worst that could happen? I'll learn something, And so he said, well, I don't want you to embarrass me. And I said, well, I don't embarrass myself. So why don't you let me give grand rounds at Baylor? And if I do well enough, you can give me your blessing and I'll go. And if not, I won't. Then we'll both be happy. So he did, and I did, and he gave me his blessing. So I went up there. Meanwhile, no one had been accepted from Mass General, which was, probably still is, the hardest program to get into for medicine, in like 20 years from Baylor, except one guy ahead of me named Sam had. And Sam went around telling everybody that I was stupid and that I didn't know anything. So I got to deal with the fears that were internal before when I was at Rice were now out there. So all these people said, oh, and Alex Leaf is senile, and Dean, doesn't know anything, he's stupid, and who the hell is he to come and give grand rounds as a medical student? So all this stuff started coming back to me as I'm getting ready to go up there and give grand rounds. And I'm going, wow, I said, so I called the guy up. I said, because we started together in the same class, but because I took a year off between my second and third, he became a year ahead of me. I said, Sam, what the fuck? Why are you doing this? And he said, because I want to be the only one that's been from Mass, that's been accepted from Baylor. And who the hell are you, that you should be able to do that, and
He was honest anyway.
and I said, and he said, you're going to make more work because you don't know anything. You're stupid. And we have a team system, and, you're going to just make more work for everybody. So I have to protect people from you coming there. So now I had to deal with externally the own demons that have been internal before, like you're stupid and don't know anything. But now it's coming from this guy at Harvard. So now I'm giving grand rounds, and all these people kept telling me all this shit they were hearing about me from before I even got there, which I'd never really experienced before, growing up kind of in a sheltered environment. So I said, this will be interesting. So I gave grand rounds and was in the Shriners Burn Amphitheater. It looks like, again, out of the Paper Chase, one of these big amphitheaters that goes up forever. And I did a good job, and they asked me questions and I could answer them reasonably well. And everybody was like, wow, maybe he's not that stupid after all, But it was just one of those life experiences. But then when I started on the wards, I'd been out of school for a year, and a lot of my senior time I'd spent doing research. So I didn't really have the kind of clinical experience a lot of people did. So I was rusty when I started. I did take me time to get up to speed, but it was worth it. So anyway.
And that was then at Mass General.
That was then at Mass General. And then later, something I've actually never talked about, but it's probably worth mentioning here, is that Alex went on to be the first chief of, and Alex later shared with me, he said that, he said he thought that was the most presumptuous thing anyone had ever done in his life, the lowly medical student from Texas calling the god of medicine at Harvard. He was so tickled by the idea of it. That's what who is this guy who's got so much chutzpah that he went down and to see for himself, and that's how he became my mentor. And then he became the first chair of preventive medicine at Harvard. And then when he died a few years ago, Harvard had this fetchrift to honor his life, and they had the chairs of all the major departments. They gave them each like 3 or 4 minutes to say something. They gave me like almost a half an hour, 25 minutes to talk about my work. And then afterwards they came up to me and they said, oh, Alex will be pleased, which was kind of a nice validation after all the shit that I'd gone through along the way there. In fact, even Michael DeBakey, who gave me who was merciless when I was a medical student. And, when we'd be operating, he'd stick your fingers with a needle and draw blood if you didn't move them fast enough out of the field.
That's good for sterile procedure.
Very, very old school. And he would say, like, what year are you, son? And I'd say, well, I'm a second year medical student. He said, damn, it's going to be so much harder to bust you out of here with these weird ideas you have than if you were a freshman, So a few years ago, I get this call, and he says, hi, Dean, this is Mike DeBakey. I hadn't heard from him in literally 30 or 40 years. And he has a very distinctive Louisiana accent. And I said, to what do I owe this honor? I was really touched. He said, well, those ideas I gave you such a hard time about when you were younger? I said, I remember very well. He said, that's what's kept me alive all these years. And I just wanted you to know that because I'm 99 years old and I'm about to die. And I just wanted you to know that before I passed. And I thought, wow, I'm so honored by that. Because apparently he remarried that German woman who was very interested in these kinds of weird ideas. And it's, it seemed to have helped him. So I guess if you live long enough, you just never know.
Fantastic. So you're how many years did you do at the MGH?
So I was 3 years there as an intern and resident. And Alex wanted me to set up a reversing heart disease center at Mass General. But the cardiology, everything is so hierarchical there, even the chief of medicine, but they said, you're not a cardiologist, so you need to hire a cardiologist to run this center because you're not a cardiologist, you're a kidney specialist. But, he's an internist as well, of course. And so he hired this cardiologist to run the center, and the cardiologist did not like the idea that I'd be doing this work there. And so it just made it very challenging to stay there. So I got offers in other places. So I ended up going to, they basically said, look, if you need to stay in the Harvard system, you need to work in someone else's lab until you're 40. And then maybe we'll let you do your own research. You don't do your own research, you just finish your residency. Because I've been doing it since I was a medical student in Texas. They had a whole very different ethos. So I said, okay, thank you. So I went to San Francisco and we set up a nonprofit preventive medicine research institute there, which is a 501c3 public foundation, and joined the faculty at UCSF and became a full professor fairly quickly. And then began doing these studies, which we're now doing the first study to see if we can reverse Alzheimer's. And I'm hopeful that if we can show that, that'll be in many ways more important than anything we've ever done, because at least with other conditions, there's always other treatments that have at least some efficacy, but nothing really has been shown to do anything other than to slow the rate at which you get worse if you get Alzheimer's. It's a profoundly isolating disease. People, it's like, what was that person's name? And where did I leave my keys? And so you don't want to go out much because you don't want to embarrass yourself. And next thing you know, you're sitting in front of a doctor and they're going, I'm sorry, you have Alzheimer's disease. And there's nothing we can do except to slow down the rate at which you get worse. So, get your affairs in order. And, that's about all we can do. And now,
are you working at all with Bredesen?
And then they say, and by the way, we have to take away your driver's license. So now your world shrinks even more.
Yeah.
And so when and it's like the scene in 2001 where they start taking out the memory cores of how the computer, he starts to sing days and days. It's kind of like your brain just starts to shut down because it's so, having been so depressed when I was younger, I can only imagine what it'd be like to hear this news that your brain is only going to keep shutting down. And the best you can do is slow down the rate at which it shuts down. And you just go, fuck, what do I have to look forward to, And so people become depressed. And so in our study, as you'd love this because of your interest in support groups, we create a support group where now people who have been so isolated because, even often, like one guy said, as soon as I was diagnosed, my wife left me, my dog died, lost my driver's license, my world just shrank to nothing. And now they're with other people in a safe environment and can let down their emotional defenses and talk openly and authentically about what's really going on in their lives. And someone say, my dog died too, and and I lost my driver's license, but let's get a bike together. I got a bike, so they'll go bike riding together. And Luis Tajoyos, who did the Game Changers film and got an Academy Award for The Cove, lives down the street from us in Sausalito. So he's been filming this whole process of people like a light coming on in their eyes. And one guy saying things, and this is not for public consumption, but because it's only this is only anecdotal at this point and only the data on the first couple cohorts of patients. But all I can say here is that I'm hopeful that it'll work. And if it does, it'll be more important than anything we've done because, you know, nothing else can actually reverse the progression of Alzheimer's. And so I'm hoping that if we can show that it does, it'll give millions of people new hope and new choices. It's a big if, but that's what gets me out of bed every day.
Yeah. Now back to your personal life. Did you get married somewhere along the way, and what kind of support did you have through all of this?
Well, let's see. My first year of medical school, I fell in love with a woman who was and is absolutely brilliant. Was a former dancer in the Joffrey Ballet and in the Alvin Ailey dance troupe, and one of their performing company, along with Judith Jameson, some other legendary people. And we began living together in first year of medical school and continued to live together all the way through residency, and then finally moving to San Francisco for a few years. The problem was that she was the wrong skin color, and so my parents disowned me for 16 years. And you know, there's a whole lot of drama around that I might write about someday. And we got married. I didn't want to get married because we didn't have a lot of intimacy, and even though we've been together for so many years, and you know, in part because we've been through our training and we'd be on call on different nights and all of that. We didn't see each other that often, but it just wasn't really the right fit. But it became very hard to split up because my parents said if we got married, they would get a gun and come shoot us. So I felt like I had to get married just to prove to myself that I wasn't a coward. And and again, having survived being suicidal, it was just like, okay, you know, that'd be a real irony if I decided not to kill myself and my own dad shoots me and kills me. But anyway, so she would say, you know, well, we don't have enough intimacy because we're not married. And I say, well, I don't want to get married because we don't have enough intimacy. So I just figured out the only way that I could ever find out is to get married. So we got married. And it didn't make anything any better. It lasted like a week and a half, and then we split. So technically, I've been married then, and then several years later, I got married, and that lasted for about 7 years. And my oldest son, Lucas, who's now 19, is in New York City at school, in college, came from that marriage. And then Ann and I began working together about 21 or 22 years ago. I needed a really brilliant web designer and web producer, and through a mutual friend met her, and so she did all of that, and later developed the whole empowerment learning management system. You know, Medicare is covering my reversing heart disease program now, so we've been training hospitals and clinics and physician groups around the country, and it's working, by the way. We're getting bigger changes in lifestyle, better clinical outcomes, bigger cost savings, and better adherence than anyone's shown. And so she's kind of made a turnkey for us to train the doctor, the nurse, the yoga teacher, the exercise physiologist, the dietitian, the psychologist that staff all of these different centers. And so she's got all the lecture notes and PowerPoint slides and videos and et cetera. Just, it's brilliant. Anyway, she's as brilliant as she is beautiful. And so we worked together just for 8 years. We were very close friends, but then later we ended up getting married, and we've been together now. We've been married for 16 years, and we just seem to fall more deeply in love every day. I know it sounds really sappy, but it's by far the most amazing thing that I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
And one of the most amazing things about it is that, you know, having grown up like you did, you know, you were a little ahead of me, but in the 60s, and that whole ethos of, you know, free love and, you know, don't fence me in and all of that's real freedom, is being with different partners. And that can be really fun. But what I learned is that by totally committing to one person, that it's actually the most liberating thing I've ever done, even though that's such a paradox, because it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that you can only be intimate to the degree you can be emotionally vulnerable and open your heart. And you can only do that to the degree you feel safe. So if you're totally committed with someone and you say, as my true, and we call each other true love, which is really sappy, or TL for short, because we are each other's true loves. And we've learned that we made a commitment that we are committed to each other no matter what, not only for this lifetime, but all lifetimes to come, just so there's no wiggle room, you know. So if you really kind of stop and say, okay, well, if that's really true, and we have a fight of some kind, which doesn't happen very often, but like all couples, we brush up against, you know, we're two intense people and brush up against each other. And by the way, being with someone who's that powerful, just on an energetic level, allows me to like not have to hold back when we're together, which is so liberating. But in any event, so what happens is you say, okay, if we really are going to be totally committed, if we are totally committed, we really are going to be together no matter what. And if you have an argument with someone, you know, it's sooner or later you're going to get to a good place again. So like, why don't we just go right to that place? You know, because
yeah.
every day is precious. So it's like, and we have a lot more choice about this than we had once realized. So why don't we choose to just go to that place and give up the idea of who's right or wrong and just say, look, what lesson can we learn from this? How can we grow? And let it go, and then have a date and make love, and you know, and enjoy this sacred, precious moment instead of like, oh, I'm right, and I can go talk to my friends, or I could go find a therapist, or I could find whatever, and you know, a jury of my peers would, you know, vote that I was right, and I'd be miserable, you know. But like, why would I want to do that when I have more choice and I could actually go to this place instead? So we even came up with a code word so that at least one of us could remember that while we're in the middle of the heated argument, then we can short circuit it. If we both forget, then it can go on for a while. But then we couldn't remember the code word. Like, what was that code word? So we decided we'd make code word the code word. So now if one of us forgets, the other person goes code word, and they're like,
code word.
Yeah, okay, got that.
Brilliant. Well, it took me to age 68 to find my true love. I'm envious that you did it so much earlier. I had two marriages, a 7-year marriage with a child, and then a 32-year marriage, but now I'm going steady. So after 8 years, she won't marry me. But we're both 77 years old, and we get more in love every day, and it's fantastic. And
I'm glad you found that too. It makes everything else seem like background music.
Yeah, and it's the constant issue of owning my shadow projections, that when I get upset with somebody else. And in fact, we formed a group in Novato. I live in Marin Valley, this amazing community. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's one of Marin's best. Pardon?
It's supposed to be lovely there.
Yeah, we have this amazing group of people, and Yvonne and I found there are 9 of us presently, or 8 in this group, that we meet regularly as to create a functional family and to own our shadow projections and to get practice in being able to decompress when we get triggered. And it's been fantastic. It's one of several groups I've done over the years, from starting with the family that was the Wellness Resource Center. And to me, that's the basis of my work, is to, because of all my unconscious childhood wounding, and which were my gifts. You know, I think our gifts come out of our wounds. That the fact that I went into wellness, you know, you teach what you need to learn, and it's certainly true in my case. So
our wounds are our windows.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I can't tell you how many patients have said things to me like having a heart attack was the best thing that ever happened, or being diagnosed with prostate cancer. And you go like, what are you, nuts? And they say, well, no, that's what it took to get my attention to begin addressing these issues that have so transformed my life that I wouldn't have done otherwise. And that's the sacred opportunity I think we have, the conspiracy of love, if you will, is to we can reach people when they're really suffering and say, well, you know, I can give you this drug or surgery, you know, to get you through the life-threatening part of it. But here's where the work really gets interesting. Here's how you can use the experience of suffering as a catalyst and as a doorway for transforming your life in ways that go beyond just physically getting well. Because, you know, we're all going to die. I mean, I know that from my own experience, but it's not something most people think about. I mean, I think about it all the time, having come so close to it. Most people don't. And so, except when they get diagnosed with a life-threatening condition, then they think about it a lot. And they only think about it for like 4 or 6 weeks or so. But if you can get someone when they're really open, then it can be an incredible transformation. And so that's why I spent 16 years to get Medicare to cover our program, because I knew that we could really make this a really transformative opportunity for people. Because, you know, it's not just about living longer, it's about living better and feeling better and rediscovering inner sources of peace and joy and well-being, and learning about how we project, you know, all this stuff on other people. I mean, I'm going to write a book one day called The Moskowitz Gene, because my mom's side of the family are the Moskowitzes, and they're all brilliant and they're all miserable for the most part. And again, they can create this whole reality. I mean, we're all manifestors of, look how somebody's done something wrong to me, and look how bad that is, and I'm right and they're wrong, you know. And it's like, okay, I can do that really well, but I can catch myself sooner now.
Fascinating. I was noticing the table of contents of your 1998 book that you interviewed Harvey Zarin, who was a classmate of mine at Tufts.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I had made contact with him a few years ago when he got saw the light and made a transformation. But I hadn't realized that you had encountered him there, and just all these amazing connections. Um, I'm curious, did you know of Halbert Dunn? And back when we were doing the Wellness Resource Center, you were off in Boston then, I would guess.
I didn't know. I just knew that you had one, and I would read your newsletter, but that was about it.
Uh-huh.
But it was very supportive to know that there was someone else out there that was doing interesting related work.
Yeah, I'm amazed at the high pressure lifestyle that you live. I started out that way and it burned me out, and I moved to Costa Rica and lived in the mountains with the Quakers for 4 or 5 years, and have stayed below the radar pretty much ever since. But how do you deal with the stresses of your life, and what you and Ann have each other, and do you have other support people, or what?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it's meaningful, then it's sustainable. There was a great book written 50 or 60 years ago that Viktor Frankl wrote called Man's Search for Meaning, about people in concentration camps in World War II. And again, it wasn't usually the healthiest or the strongest. It was the ones who had the strongest sense of meaning and purpose. I have to survive so that I can, bear witness or write a book or be reunited with my loved ones or whatever it was. And so I have a really strong sense of purpose. I love the work I do. I mean, how often in life do you get a chance to do work that might literally, if this Alzheimer's study works, and especially the fact that Louis is doing a documentary about it that we're going to give away for free, I mean, how often do you get a chance to potentially at least make a difference in the lives of millions of people, with the Medicare covering my reversing heart disease program, and most of the major insurance companies paying for it? There are tens of thousands of people who are benefiting from that. I mean, so they just, having learned I could take all the meaning out of my life when I got so depressed. I mean, that's what being depressed is. It's, as you know, if you were depressed, it's what Steve Jobs would call a reality distortion field. You're convinced you're seeing things clearly for the first time when actually they're totally distorted. You're like, things are bad. They'll always be bad. They've never been good. They're always going to be bad. And so that's where that helplessness and hopelessness, that's the hallmark of depression, comes from, is this really distorted view of reality that things have always been bad and they always will be bad. So why bother? Who cares? So what? Nothing matters. Big deal. All those things. So I could take all the meaning out of life. But I later learned that this is what I learned from the Swami, that when you do good work to help other people, it's the most selfish thing you can do, and properly seen, because that's what frees us from our suffering. When you love someone, when you forgive them, when you have compassion, when you can do that for yourself, you can only give what you can't give what you don't have. So the more you love yourself, the more love you have to give other people. I'll tell you a story that I don't talk about very often, but I did put it in the Reversing Heart Disease book, that when you talk about kind of owning your darkness, is when I was a freshman in medical school, I went to a workshop that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross gave, because I knew, having come so close to dying myself, I wanted to learn more about death and dying, and she was like the expert at the time. And as you know, she had these 5 stages of death. So I thought, we'll spend several days and she'll say, stage 1 is this, and stage 2. And got there and it wasn't like that at all. She had about 50 or 60 people, mostly nurses and psychologists and ministers. I was the only medical student there. And she was basically doing a kind of a primal scream workshop of having people hit this phone book with this rubber radiator hose, kind of acting out all their violent, dark stuff. And her thesis, which has some truth to it, but turned out not to be so true, is that when you work with dying people, they will bring up your own issues. And if you haven't dealt with them, then you'll avoid them because they'll be uncomfortable. You won't even be aware of it. And so to the degree you can kind of explore your darkness and come to terms with that, then you're going to have more love and light to share with other people. There's some truth to that, but it wasn't quite that way. But I mean, what she said is true, but the pathway was not the right way. So she said, let's have people act out all their violent, dark fantasies, by hitting this phone book and ripping it to shreds, as a way of kind of have a catharsis of that. So I watched for like 3 or 4 days, all these, sort of gentle people getting up, and then suddenly it was like helter skelter, it was like Charles Manson, was channeling through them. And they just kind of go through this stuff, and then the next person would go. So I having been so intimately involved with my own demons when I was suicidal, I didn't feel the need to do that again. But by the last Sunday morning, I thought my little inner voice, which I've learned to trust, said, you need to do this. And I said, don't be ridiculous. I don't need to do this. I know what my demons, why would I want to do this? They just said, just do it. So I learned to trust that voice. So I did it. So I went up there and I started to hit this phone book with this radiator hose, and I couldn't get into it at all. So she's very intuitive. She said, well, imagine you're hitting a person, not just a radiator. I mean, not just a phone book. So I started thinking about, all right, let me really just get into this. And so I kind of, any negative feelings I had towards an ex-girlfriend or my parents or whatever, I just kind of acted out for the next 15 or 20 minutes. And by the time I was done, I was dripping with sweat. I had blisters on my hands and I felt worse because I realized the message, the important lesson I learned there is that when you, it's not a catharsis. It intensifies the anger and the bad feelings. It doesn't free you of it. It actually intensifies it. It's a good thing to learn. So I thought, okay, well, that's what I was here to learn. That's what my little voice wanted me to do. So I was about to get up. She said, no, I think you're not done yet. Elizabeth said. So I said, well, I think I am actually. And she said, no, you've left out someone. I said, who could I have possibly left out? I've just, obliterated, all these various people. She said, no, think about it. So I thought about it. I thought, the Swami, I left out the Swami. And I'd heard a lecture he gave years before about the man who found God through pure hatred of God, in which we don't really have anything in Western culture to correspond to. And the idea was that the purity of the emotion will take you, spiritually advance you. It's only when you're kind of like, maybe this, maybe that, what's the pro and what's the con, you do or whatever. So I said, okay, in my own mind, I said, okay, let me try this. So imagine, if I'm going to do it, do it fully. And that's one thing I've learned. So I imagined the Swami standing in front of me in his long saffron robes. But everyone, and I started hitting him with his radiator hose. It was realer than real. Is the only way I can describe it. And I know, like other people, get shocked and then fight back and then try to protect themselves. He just stood there with his arms outstretched and let me hit him, which made me even madder at the time, as dark as that sounds. And so I looked up to hit him across the face. Again, I know this sounds terrible, but I thought, if I'm going to learn anything from this, I have to do it 100%. So, and I could see that there were these tears coming down his face. And they weren't tears of physical pain because I was hurting him with his radiator hose. I can only describe it as tears of pure compassion. And I could hear him say, as clearly as I'm even clearer after that, hearing you, you poor ignorant boy, you just don't know any better. Without a hint of being condescending or patronizing. It was just pure, like, you poor boy, you just don't know any better. And at that moment, I melted. It was like, wow, I'm showing the darkest part of myself to this other being who is only giving me light and love in return. So, who has so much compassion that he can take all that darkness and just shine a light, and the light drives out the darkness. And then it's like, wow, if someone else can have that kind of compassion on my darkness that's so fully displayed here, maybe I can have that kind of compassion for my own darkness. And so I started to feel that for the first time. And then the next thought was, wow, if I can have that kind of compassion for my darkness, then I can have it for other people's darkness. And then we're all free. And so at that moment, I just melted. And then I really did feel transformed at that point. And I still am. And then later, when I was working the ER and somebody was drunk and, OD'd and was throwing up on me, I could kind of picture the Swami with the tears coming down his face. I still do when someone does something that's, hurtful. And I think that compassion is at the root of healing. I mean, even the word healing, as you know, comes from the root to make whole. Yoga is from the Sanskrit, to yoke, to unite, union. These are really old ideas. And so the conspiracy of love for me, and why, I'm so happy that Medicare is now paying for it, is that we can now give this to the people who most need it. Years ago, Lee Lipsenthal and I trained the St. Vincent de Paul homeless shelter in San Francisco, and over 30,000 homeless people went through our program. So it's not just for, rich white people. And so to be able now to, under the Trojan horse of reversing heart disease or diabetes or prostate cancer and perhaps Alzheimer's, we can help people who are suffering learn how to transform their lives and rediscover inner sources of peace and joy and love for themselves and compassion for themselves, so that they can then go out and provide love and compassion for others, and to use meditation and yoga not just as a way of managing stress or unclogging your arteries or lowering your blood pressure, but to go down deep enough to that place where you feel that sense of peace, not because, again, as we talked about earlier, that the meditation brought that to you, but you just, at least temporarily, you're not disturbing it. And if you take it even deeper to the place of non-duality, that on one level we're separate, you're you and me, I'm me, but on another level we're part of something larger that connects us all, whatever, even to give it a name is to limit what's essentially a limitless or ineffable experience. And so, like the Swami would say, it's like watching a movie projector, like watching a movie, the projector, the light comes through the film, and then you have all these names and forms and dramas. You can only enjoy them if you also know that they all come from that same light behind it. And then you can be, then you can enjoy all the names and forms and dramas and not get stuck in them. And so for me to be able to have a vehicle now that mostly is covered for a lot of people, that can help them use the experience of suffering as a doorway for transforming their lives, just as it was for me when I was suicide depressed and the Swami helped me. I feel like now I have a chance to, by doing this work, help so many other people. And that brings tremendous meaning and joy and purpose in my life. It allows me to take risks that other people would think are insane, just because it's like, I can't live any other way.
Wow. Well said. Are there any other areas that we, pardon?
That's all I have to say. That's more than I thought I'd be saying.
More than, can you talk? Yeah. What, are there any last words on this, that things I've missed or things that you'd like to about about your path, your journey? That's the unique part I want to capture here. And I've been delighted.
I just love what I do. And I get, stressed out by various things, but having that sense of meaning and purpose really keeps me on, gets me back to a good place. And, if people are interested in learning more about our work, just go to ornish.com and that will take you to various other places. It's all
that link will be on your name in the narrative. Another thing though, because people watching this in the future may not be aware of it, but we're right in the midst of the beginning of this COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic in the States, which we'll see how that comes to pass. But what thoughts do you have on the way it's being handled, and how serious do you think it is compared to, say, flu or, as you mentioned, heart disease, which gets little attention?
Well, this will be the last thing because I have to go. But the short version is that, my teacher used to say, don't get influenced by the influenza. He liked to make puns. And there was a study that Sheldon Cohen did in JAMA many years ago, where I don't know how he got this through Human Studies Committee, but he dripped rhinovirus, cold viruses into people's nose, and later coronavirus, but a different variant than the one that's out there now. And 100% of the people got infected, but not everybody got sick. And they found that in one study that the people who had 6 or more social interactions from a friend or family member, either as a phone call or a visit over a 2-week period, compared to those who had 2 or less, were 4.2 times less likely to get the signs and symptoms of a cold than those who didn't, even though they were all infected. Yeah. So the virus, in Koch's postulates, we're all taught that, the rhinovirus causes you to get sick.
Right.
And if you inject it into an animal and cause it to get sick, then they say, well, see, that's what caused it. But we don't generally inject ourselves with these things. And even if you inhale them, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to get sick. And so there's a lot we can do just in terms of enhancing our own immune function. If we eat well and move more and stress less and love more, that can help boost our immunity. And then we can just take precautions and so on. I think fear, itself can be self-fulfilling to the extent that it causes your immune function. Even when Margaret Chesney did a study of men and women who are HIV positive, and those that were depressed were more than twice as likely to go on and develop AIDS and die from it than those who weren't, even though they're all infected with the virus. So we have some control in that sense. But, but I do think that, it's more dangerous than the regular flu because, at least these numbers are continually changing, but the mortality from the coronavirus is, 3.4% versus it's 2% versus 0.1%. It's 2.1 or 2.2%. It's a 34-fold difference in mortality, but it's pretty low to begin with. So then the question is really, what's the denominator? How many people are actually going to get sick? And I do think to the degree we can help reduce its transmission, then that's a good thing. But, on the other hand, diabetes and heart disease kill more people than all of the diseases combined, including coronavirus, AIDS, TB, malaria, et cetera. And we know how to prevent and reverse those diseases, but because these are things that we just take for granted as though they're a normal cause of death, but they're not. And so there's a lot of of fear and loathing out there that's above and beyond what I think the data really show us. I think we do need to take it seriously, but there are a lot of other things that are killing a lot more people every day that we just think are, you know, the way that things always should be and always will be. And when most of that is completely preventable and even reversible. And I
It
think that's
seems
the
like,
challenge that I have is people think it has to be, you know, a new drug, a new laser, something really high tech and expensive to be powerful. And I think our unique contribution has been to use these very high tech, expensive, state of the art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very low tech and low cost and often
yeah,
ancient interventions can be.
it seems like the media is just having a field day with it. And I'm wondering, you know, what kind of commercial interests are behind it? Is Big Pharma wanting more money for a new vaccine, which wouldn't likely work anyway? And the, you know, watching the hysteria in the media is shocking to me, but
We'll only know in retrospect. I mean, if it turns out to be like 1918, when you know, 100 million people got sick and 50 million died, that, you know, we'll know. I mean, I think
yeah.
being careful is good. Being scared is not. So.
Well, thank you again so much for your time and wisdom, and it's been great getting to know you this way.
Me
So,
too. I'm grateful. You know, to me, awareness is always the first step in healing. So thank you for helping me to raise awareness. And I hope at least part of it's been useful to at least someone out there. So thank you.
I'm
Thanks for
sure.
helping inspire my work as well by your leadership. You know, you're in the trail ahead of me.
Okay. Take care.
You too. Take care.